Is anybody so inclined? Councillor Veith, Councillor Whaley. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's all of us. Next up is reports of committees. Does anybody want to move those? Councillor Henry, Councillor Burke. Any questions? All those in favor? That's everybody. Thank you. We have no presentations, delegations, consent. First up is staff report, a servicing agreement on 355 Lexington Road. We have a report prepared by Rhonda, and it's just for questions for anybody. Anybody have any questions on the servicing agreement? Seeing none, somebody care to move it? Councillor Whaley, Councillor Henry. All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you. Next up, heritage permit application HP 17-11, 61 Yonge Street West, prepared by Michelle Lee. And I think we have a no presentation on this, right? Simply for questions. Questions from council? 61 Yonge, Councillor Durrell.
I'm happy to move this, and I think it's great. I appreciate that staff are working with homeowners on making reasonable renovations, but also helping people continue to live in the core, but in homes that will work for them. So I think it's great, and this is a great precedent. Thank you.
Okay, moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Burke. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Next up, we have the de-accession of the human quilt. And this is something that Sonia put together. It's a piece of artwork, temporary artwork, that has gone beyond its time, it seems. And we have a picture of it at our desks and on our computer screens. Been in storage, no longer viable. Do we have any questions on this? Councillor Whaley.
Not a question, but a comment. This beautiful piece has lived in the community for so many years. Is there any intention to get some digital remembrances of this so that we can put it in our museum as time goes by?
Thank you, Councillor Whaley. To Sonia, please. And I can get you to do your microphone, please.
We actually have a really good collection of photographs. We have piece by piece photographs of the entire thing. It's quite large. It's 12 feet by 48 feet wide. We don't have a terrific collection of them in their entirety, but together we have pieces, and certainly we keep them as part of our collection, and we can pass them on to the museum as well.
Thank you. Further questions? We need a motion on that. Councillor Henry, Councillor Veith. Well, it served its time. All those in favor? That'd be all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. Next up, D. Laurelwood Drive and Beaver Creek Road property transfer with the GRCA. Getting some of their land where we currently have stormwater ponds. Any questions on that? Councillor Whaley.
I have to go to my page 75 here in my report. Yeah, it was interesting to note that behind Laurelwood School, there's Laurelwood Park there. And I wondered if, because this, one of these swim ponds is actually adjacent to the park, if there's any idea to have Laurelwood Park extended into the into this newly acquired or soon to be acquired GRCA land. They're all together anyway, and I wonder what opportunity there is for us to turn this into parkland for the neighborhood.
So we may be looking to Commissioner Dykstra or Commissioner Rapp to give us a handle on that.
I'll go first. Yeah, certainly. Certainly through Mayor to Councillor Whaley. That was not the intention of this report, but if we do, through this process, acquire the rest of those lands, then we could have discussions with community services about the future use of that swim facility. It is an overland flow for should the reservoir fill up, so we'd be somewhat limited in what those uses are, but if it's in our ownership, we'd easily be able to work with community services and perhaps the community as to what we might be able to utilize that parcel for. Unless, and I believe that would be Commissioner Dykstra's opinion as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on this? Seeing none, I might look for the ward councillor to move it. He does. Councillor Burke, thank you. Next up, next mover is, or next seconder is Councillor Henry. Further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, you already. Oh, go ahead.
It's actually late. It's not Ward 3 as it says on the report there.
Ah.
It's mostly Ward 2, right?
All Ward 2, I think. Well, maybe better luck next time, Councillor Reid. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Item E, Waterloo Memorial Rec Center and the Older Adult Centers Facility Integration Development Study Phase 2. Feasibility study and the upcoming public engagement. Welcome, Beth.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce Phil Finnick. He's the architect working with us on this project, as well as his team at Perkins and Well. Just wanted to remind Council that in May of 2017, we presented you with a needs assessment report for this project. It focused on two things. One, looking at the possible expansion of the WMRC to meet the growth needs of our community. And two, to look at the possible relocation of programming from the Adult Rec Center and the Wing 404 to a new older adult center at the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex. That needs assessment provided us with a functional program design that we've used to move forward. And in May, Council approved advancement of a feasibility study, which is the next step in our process. And that feasibility study is looking at detailed site evaluation, conceptual design, schematic design. It will include a phase of public engagement. And we have some preliminary information about construction cost estimates, and we're currently working on operating cost estimates for the new facility. A few quick notes. The site review resulted in an understanding that we did not need any additional parking for the site. We actually had plenty of parking. There are restrictions on the site due to GRCA floodplain that limit where we can put the new buildings. And we have moved forward with dividing the expansion to the building into two components, one on the east side of the facility and one on the west, which you'll see when you look at the drawings. The draft conceptual design process, again, is based on that functional program design that was presented to Council back in May. So we've used that as the foundation of the work that we're doing now, and that was based on what we heard as needs from the community as well as other research. Phil and his team have presented us with multiple options on what that design looks like, as well as Class D costing. And as a team, we've been working to revise that to improve functionality, so interaction between various spaces in the facility, and to respond to funding constraints where possible. We're here tonight to share with you those conceptual designs and to seek approval to move forward with public consultation on those draft conceptual designs. We are proposing open houses on October 12th, as well as opportunities to provide feedback via Engage Waterloo and after the fact, sharing information with those that attend our facilities for a few days. Just a reminder that in the needs assessment, the functional space program that we presented to you included the key spaces that we need for older adults and for general recreation spaces. For older adults, we looked at the need for program rooms, a kitchen for the LIN program, a lounge area, a separate reception area, offices and other spaces for staff, a games computer room, and storage. Spaces, we looked at the need for program rooms, locker areas, an activity court or gym, storage, group exercise studios, and a secondary walking track for the WMRC. As a reminder, when we did consultation with the community for the needs assessment report, there was general support from the community, and particularly from older adults, around the move from two facilities over to WMRC. This was seen as an opportunity for intergenerational programming and for more shared spaces and for access to things like the pool, to Waterloo Park, to the walking tracks at WMRC. Just a quick note on funding constraints for the project. Funding sources currently identified include DC funding, disposition revenue. which will be impacted by some of the things that would shape the sale value should disposition move forward. It's important to note that the first 21,700 square feet of space that we build at the WMRC would need to be paid for by the city, so we could not use DC funding for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Phil now. Just a quick note, in the package on page 86 in the council package, 2 numbers got inverted. So what is on this diagram, number 1 was labeled number 3, and vice versa. So we've provided you with an updated version of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. So I'm going to walk you through our high-level concept plans right now that resulted from our consultations and our research. So as you see, we have the plan of the WMRC here with the parking entry to the east here, and assume this is north to the left. And then this is kind of the westerly parking lot. This is kind of like a wood lot, and here is Father David Bauer Drive, and the main vehicle entry into the facility is from here. So we looked at the basically 3 program components. We have, as Beth outlined, we have the need for recreation components, we have the need for fitness components, and we have obviously the need to replace all of the program components of the ARC. And because of the floodplain floodway, we weren't really allowed to build anywhere along the north. Along the south, it's very busy with vehicle access, loading and shipping, and totally disconnected from the central spine of the building. So we looked at opportunities to the east and to the west. And that actually ended up to become a win-win, because what we wanted to have at the front, at the civic front, let's call it, is kind of a large general purpose activity court that would complement the recreational facilities that the overall Memorial Center offers now. In the middle, where, if you know the building, at the second, or let's call it the third level, is Hauser House, we found the opportunity to repurpose that as your fitness core, so we could put very group exercise facilities. And then to the west, we opted to design and propose a community pavilion that would house the ARC facilities and some other additional group exercise and group program components. The reason it was a pavilion, or it is a pavilion and connected by a bridge, is that as we did more site research, there is a significant amount of underground services that not only serve this building but feed out into the surrounding residences. So you have your stormwater mains, your water mains, your hydro, your fiber optics. So that's kind of like a artery of many different components that when we tested the cost for relocating them, they would be very high. So we opted to make a pavilion with a bridge, which was in essence kind of a win-win situation, because it allows the older adults to have a place where they can be a part of the Memorial Center, but also retain a certain amount of their own identity, their own entrance, and then have the option of connecting back to the larger facility. So those are the 3 different components of this project. If we look at them one by one, the civic front we looked at as an opportunity to make a great new first impression for the visitors. It's a beautiful building now, but it could actually have more activity showcased as you come in. So this program involves an activity court, which includes gym activities, but it can include a lot more. It all depends on the type of surfaces that we put in there. Here, for instance, we're showing 3 to 4 pickleball courts that could be used by seniors, but also a wide range of other residents. We have a new lobby that neatly tucks into the existing lobby, some administration that would relieve some of the congestion that's happening in the internal parts of the building, and some change rooms that could augment the arena use, but also could augment the activity court. So in one move, we're actually able to address a number of different opportunities that we have at the front of the building. So this is an ideal location for use by all ages and interests, young and old, has minimum impact on parking, and you'll certainly get a kind of new impression of the building as you enter. In the core, which is kind of fitting because it's all about fitness, we looked at the Hauser House space, which is a fairly large space, subdivided and not, based on our analysis, not totally capitalized upon. So we've opted to locate 2 group fitness studios there that could provide for group exercise, additional fitness programming, could also be used to house conveying and reception events during tournaments, either for the gym, so either for the pool or for the arena. But also, it allowed us an opportunity to provide an indoor walking track, which was identified as a key overlap of uses. Seniors and older adults want to use the walking track, but you also have some pretty serious clubs using the walking track. So there's always this conflict. So here we're able to allow the operators to provide an option for residents to use a walking track. It's 102 meters long, so twice around you're doing 200 meters, and it could be used virtually any time of the day. So we thought that was another kind of win-win scenario. And access would be provided from the elevator that exists now, which is right here, from a bridge that connects to the older adult center to the west. And we're looking at repurposing this freight elevator so it too can provide another access from internally from the Memorial Center. So that's our second component, which is the central fitness core. So we're bringing life to an old space that has now needs repurposing. The final component, which is the community pavilion, is 2 floors, and its primary purpose is to replicate, enhance the program components that are provided now at the ARC, and the ARC and the wing combined. So 1 floor is primarily for that, and the second floor allows for use by ARC program users, but can also be repurposed, or scheduled for use by residents after the ARC users are completed their program use. So the first floor is primarily has a lobby, the same program rooms that are found in the ARC now, an enhanced central core of washrooms and service spaces, all the required admin spaces, plus a lounge and a kitchen, which is really the heart of the center, and the support spaces that support that kitchen. On the upper level, through a stair and elevator, access can be gained to another program room, a large community room that replicates the one that's there now, used by ARC users and the band and other larger groups, and a group fitness studio. So now we're actually able to bring fitness even closer to the older adult uses. So it has a direct connection from Father David Bauer Drive. We would look at making a sidewalk connection from here, from the park, to this building. All the ARC programming is provided. Like I said, there's additional programming for both the older adults and the general community on the second floor. And then we can connect back to that fitness heart or the core via a bridge. The bridge is only 25 meters long, so it's not that long a walk. And if you're going to go use the track, that's probably a good thing. So here, looking back up at the entire site, the impact on parking is not significant, as Beth said. We have enough parking. We've done a parking study. So we're looking at a decrease of about 100 to 150 cars spread between the 2 additions. The transit connections are available. It's the same transit connections from Roslyn and Avondale. So for those that are going to the Civic Front, that won't change. And for those that are using the new relocated ARC, that would be coming from Avondale, or if they're in Luther Village, it's an easy connection right through the westerly side of the site. Like I said, the bridge link between the pavilion and the Memorial Center will allow access between both facilities at the second level. And vehicle entry remains at the off of Father David Bauer Drive here, And I think this entry here to this parking lot, which isn't that well used, will gain more and more prominence as this building has its own identity. That's it for the summary. Back to Beth.
Final couple comments. The Class D costing that's been completed has given us a sense of what it will cost to construct this facility. And I'll just remind Council that this is Class D costing, so it's about 20% above or below is where we are likely to end up when we start to refine those costing projections. So the civic front and the central fitness core would be approximately $14.9 million. And the community pavilion, so the older adult component at the back of the building, is estimated to be $11.2 million. Funding available, we have requested $14.9 in DC funding. That's a 90-10 split with 90% DC and 10% capital reserve. And funding, of course, from would be possible from any decision from Council to move forward with disposition of Arc and Wing. It's also important for Council to recall that Arc and Wing are older buildings and they're in need of some capital investment. To bring them up to sort of and keep them at a good standard would require about $4 to $5 million over the next 10 years. Few additional points. We've looked very closely at the usage of Hauser House in our determination that we could repurpose that space. And currently it sees a low usage rate for recreation. Our major users right now are the Landlord and Tenant Board and city staff for meetings. Operating cost analysis and refined capital cost analysis is being worked on in the coming weeks and will be included in the final feasibility report to Council in December. We aim to come back to Council for December 11th. And any possible, should Council decide to move forward with any disposition, we understand that that could begin as early as January 2018. We also have a commitment that should Council decide to move forward with disposition, we would have continued access to those facilities for older adults until a new facility is opened.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Beth and Phil. First up for questions is Councillor Whaley. Councillor Veith after that.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Tonight, I guess, begins the public consultation project, part of the program. You're going to be hearing a lot of stuff that you like because you've worked really hard and it's a great plan, but not everything you're going to like, and I don't think some of the things that I have to say tonight you're going to like that much either, but that's all a part of the public process, right? And my bugaboo is around a couple things, but one of them is a Hauser House. You say that it's not used very much for recreation, and you're right there, but when it is used, it's essential for the community. It's one of our biggest meeting rooms. We have important things happen there in the community. It's large enough to accommodate a lot of people, and citizens are used to going there to talk about, you know, things that are of importance to our community. So the Hauser House, if you take that offline, you take the ARC 2 meeting rooms offline, you take the meeting room and party room at the 404 wing offline, and suddenly you've got a really big problem. You have no place for the community to meet. So for me, I want you to at least think about that, about the void that you create in the community by taking the Hauser House offline and losing those two other facilities that have provided meeting space and recreation space for our community forever, and they're going to be gone. So that's an issue I have.
And I think Beth has a response. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a couple more things though. I think the transportation links, the fact that they haven't evolved with the building is really a shame. We really have to come to terms with a better transportation links. We cannot rely on our older citizens to walk down from Herb Street. We have to entreat our regional councillors to take a look at the seriousness of the money that we're spending here. We got to have better transit. With respect to having a second walking track, taking the Hauser House offline and putting a second walking track, from my opinion, it's not a capacity issue with the current walking track. There's not a capacity issue there. There's a scheduling problem, and to put in another set of walking track and taking off the community meeting room. can be handled through better scheduling, in my opinion.
Okay, go ahead, Beth, please.
Through you, Mayor. So 3 points. On the point about transit, when we were at council before, we noted that staff have been in discussion with Grand River Transit around opportunities to run a bus route down Father David Bauer Drive. At the point of that discussion, they were not willing to go in that direction. However, they have worked with our active transportation staff to fund some improvements down Avondale and Roslyn so that folks coming from Herb Street have better pedestrian access to the site. And certainly, I know community members are giving their feedback through the current consultation that's going on now around the changes in bus routes to GRT. On the matter of the sense that there's a loss of rooms in the design, so all of the rooms that you see in the community pavilion at the back, those are to replicate or replace the meeting rooms that we have at the Arc and Wing. We call them program rooms because we're not necessarily thinking of them just as meeting rooms. They could be for a meeting, they could be for a quilting group, they could be for a bridge club. So we're calling them program rooms, but they could certainly be set up anytime as a meeting room. So there are actually many meeting rooms in the addition. When we go over to the Hauser House and look at the setup we've got there, the two, what we're calling exercise studios, could be used for other community uses as well. So one of the things we've certainly spoken to Phil and his team about is the importance of having access in that space for when we have big tournaments or other major events and people want to have visual line of sight into the bowl. So those groups studio spaces would have glass walls so that people could still see out into the bowl. And then we're looking at the activity court as a big space as well. So there's still the community room in the older adult pavilion, or in the community pavilion that can house larger groups. And the activity court could be used for all kinds of things. As Phil mentioned, it depends on the kinds of services we put into that space. So out at our gyms at Rim Park, they're wood floors. That really limits the kinds of uses they can have beyond sports uses. But our thought is if we put in a more multi-use flooring, we could then allow big community gatherings in that space as well. So we're shifting around where people are meeting, but we have capacity to allow those kinds of things to continue to happen.
To add to that point, Beth, it is about 6,000 square feet of room, so you'd easily be able to have a community gathering of 200 to 300 people. So at that scale, and it's on the ground floor. The challenge with Hauser House, it's a very difficult room for the community to find and to access. So we're, again, looking for another win-win by putting an activity court on the ground floor that everybody can find. They can flow into it in a much easier way during a community meeting.
Well, I appreciate your responses tonight. I will just make this comment. The community consultation is for the community to speak their mind and for us to listen. You've kind of answered all my questions tonight, but be open for the possibility that other members of the community might have input and ideas a little different than this plan that you put forward. I hope that the plan will be flexible and that it'll take into account some of the ideas and concerns of the citizens and others who bring their ideas forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whaley. Next up, Councillor Veith and Councillor Henry. Councillor Durrell after that.
Through you,
Ray Burke, too.
Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for the presentation. I like it. It's exciting and it's fresh, and I think it'll bring new life to that space and new opportunities. But I hate talking about parking, but when there's a big event, and I know our older adults drive everywhere, and I know that's a problem with the current ARC. There's not enough parking spaces because people drive to those programs. So what concerns me, I know your study said that there's a low impact on parking, but I would imagine when we have big events, even the Potter's sale, and the place is packed, and when there's an event in the park, people park there, students park there. So anyway, I'm just really concerned about the whole parking issue with this project. So just something to keep in mind. And I'm sure in your community consultation, the older adults will talk about that, or that'll be a concern to them too. So anyway, thank you.
Through you, Mayor. Just a quick response. certainly, we know on a day-to-day basis that there is sufficient parking, but we certainly acknowledge that when there's a lot of things going on, whether at that facility or at the Waterloo Park, and with the plans around the Festival Heart, that we're going to need to look at sort of a parking strategy for that site and how we can use not just that parking lot, but other parking spaces in Uptown to meet the increasing interest in that location in Uptown. So that's on our radar.
Thank you. Next up, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Beth and Bill and team for all the work so far and all the work ahead in the community engagement. I think Councillor Whaley rightly points to this is derived from a lot of internal research plus the external feedback we already had from the first rounds of public engagement, which were incredibly well attended. I saw some of those, and the room was full of a lot of folks, including the exact folks that I know Councillor Whaley has on his mind and was raising. One thing that that strikes me as we think about the financials to go forward. You spent a lot of time today talking about capital costs. Can you talk a little bit more about what we should expect to see back in December around the operating cost side?
Yes.
and how that sort of part of the thinking?
Through you, Mayor, we've actually just started that work this week based on the square footage that we're looking to add to the space, and we're looking at what our all costs be from a utility perspective, from a maintenance perspective, staffing, and our goal is to get to as close to net zero as possible. We believe that there are opportunities for efficiencies going from 3 facilities down to essentially 1, and so that's what we're hoping to bring back to council. We're very early days in that analysis, and certainly the results of the public consultation and any changes that we make to the design based on that consultation would require us to sort of adjust our analysis there. But we will have detailed information on all of those areas.
Well, I think certainly there's a lot of pressure on operating budgets, and net zero is a laudable goal on the operating cost side, and I look forward to seeing how that works out in comparison to status quo. Certainly, I'd hope there would be efficiencies from consolidation that would benefit. But the term net zero is an interesting one as well. Councillor Freeman, last time we were talking about a new building in terms of the east side branch attending to RIM, we spoke about, LEED Silver requirements of city facilities, and whether you forego that process to try to really drive a cheaper, really better operating efficiencies from more green development. I just wonder if the model that we're taking to assess what's the right approach is to start with the capital of do the normal thing and then derive the operating from it and show it to us, is the right approach, or whether or not there are a number of capital approaches we might take that might cost more in the short run but be cheaper in the long run when we look at a full life cycle analysis of all of this, including energy, greenhouse gas usage over time. Because I think about net zero in a different way than just the operating budget side. So I put that to you as a question and as interest for December.
With regards to net zero or some of the more aggressive energy targets like Passive House, we are actually looking at that. I'm working with Kevin here to look at what the possibilities of the building to be Passive House, which is a more super insulated box that reduces your energy impact and costs. So those are our options that we are exploring at this concept stage that would have an effect on possible operating costs.
Thank you. Next up, Councillor Durrell, then Councillor Burke.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. Thank you. Good report, and appreciate all the answers to all of these questions. I think for me, we've spoken about parking and finances. What I'm wondering about, this is really strategically placed now in front of Waterloo Park. The largest brownfield development in southwestern Ontario is right beside it. Luther Village is on the other side. So while some people might be driving, a lot of people are going to be walking from those areas. And so I'm wondering if you can go through, you had a slide up, and at this point it's pretty preliminary, I understand, but for any of us that do go currently to the Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex, there's cars flying all over, and there really aren't great walking areas. So how, as we design this for people, how do we make sure that it's safe to walk around in that space?
For those that would approach this facility on foot, let's say to the Arc, we are extending a generous sidewalk to this point that allows them from the Waterloo Park to, a lot of older adults are trail walkers. They start their day by walking, and they want to go to a destination, or they start at that destination and they go for a walk. So we see this as kind of a trailhead in the sense that they could start here and go for walks through Waterloo Park, or vice versa, end there. For those that are coming from Luther Village, like we mentioned, there is the opportunity of making a direct, you can almost see it now, a direct connection from a kind of the landscaping here to that facility as well. And then, of course, as the council mentioned, we should be looking at enhancing these connections back to the neighborhood. So these are early days, but the residents of this building to connect to trails and sidewalks is being explored, because we understand that not everybody is going to be coming by car.
And just to follow up, right now the entrance is grand, but you only see it if you're standing in a brown field. It's not really facing Father David Bauer Drive. So 2 questions then. The first would be, how are we going to be pulling people off the street to this? I think one of your slides said a great first impression. There we go, new first impression. And secondly, Father David Bauer Drive has a lot of cars traveling on it, and there is no stop there. It's 50 kilometers an hour, I believe, is the speed limit, and people drive that generously. And so having people walking back and forth across to Waterloo Park seems a little bit dangerous. So what are some of the steps that we're putting in place as we progress, just so it's at the front of your minds?
Through you, Mayor. From the first impression perspective, we visited some newer community centers in southern Ontario, one of which was the Meadowvale Community Center in Mississauga. They have an activity court very similar to this, and it's all glass walls. So that's one of the things that we want to look at. As soon as you walk up to the building, you see people in there exercising, having a great time, and it does pull you into the building. So we're hopeful that that will carry forward in our plan. And then from an access by pedestrians, a couple things to add to what Phil said. The active transportation team is currently working over the fall to make some improvements already, not just to the sidewalks down Roslyn and Avondale, but to the sort of pedestrian walkway through the parking, so to delineate things through the parking lot so that people have a bit safer access to get to the front doors. And our colleagues in IPPW, who are working on station area planning, have also been in touch with us and are aware of the plans for the building and are looking at options there to bring people from the 2 ION stations into the facility as well.
Next up, Councillor Burke, please.
It's a great report. Older adult here, so I spend a lot of time walking in that area. I try to do 5K a day. I go 2.5K away from the house, so I'm forced to come back and cover the 5K to get home. And through that area, Herb Street, Roslyn, it is not particularly walkable, even for someone in my peak physical condition. But for people who are trying to get out there and be active, it is very difficult. So the improvement of that would be spectacular. I think the transit issue is a really big one. I think there should be a stop. There needs to be a stop somewhere in that corner. Somewhere, if it's not along Father David Bauer Drive, it needs to be somewhere else closer by, because right now, if we're going to have this active city and this walking city and the ability to get from one place to the other, we need transit to work with us to do that. And the way those stops are set up right now, it just simply doesn't do it. And I realize the region is saying no, but the region says no to all kinds of things. And maybe a critical mass will get there. Thank you for listening to what people said in those consultation sessions, because I was at them and they were very concerned about what they might lose. And I think through this, They're going to see some things can really be gained. And while I recognize the concerns about parking, like I say, I walk through the area all the time, I would be thrilled to see us have a parking problem where there's so many people at that facility that we're having a hard time finding places to put them. So I'm hopeful that we're going to get there. And then, of course, you know, the bigger question is, how do we pay for it? And nice to have something shiny and new, and sometimes it's worth doing things in a different way to invest in something worthwhile. I think this is worthwhile. I think it looks awesome, but we need to be responsible in the way we finance it. And hopefully, when we get to mid-December, we'll have a question about that. The only question I have is, in a perfect world where we have the money and everything's awesome, how long does it take? Because that guy over there in the press row is going to ask that question.
How long does it take to construct?
Put it all together, to have it up and running, to have people coming to do Zumba.
So the next phase of the project would be construction design, and that would take us about a year, and then move to construction, which would take us about another year, depending on start and stop and weather and that kind of thing. The DC funding is currently in 2020, so that is another factor to consider in timing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You know, just from a Grand River Transit perspective, I think, you know, the next Grand River Transit business plan, which is being worked on right now, forecasts out about 5 years. So right now the facility will be coming on stream in that time frame. So it's really hard for them to guess. In discussions with Grand River Transit, I think they're open to ideas. It's just what is it? And even tonight we're just seeing what it might be. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to work on something for Father David Bauer Drive, including the students were also keen on that, having something come down and around Seagram as well. What I really love about this is the intergenerational impact. So as an age-friendly city, it's so important for us to have, you know, I think everybody craves that intergenerational connectivity from grandparents down to children and beyond, that I think this can really afford it. Plus you have that mixed use of a lot of seniors or older adults want to use things in the morning and during the day, and as we found out, people really like those core times of using it after dinner time and afterwards. So I think we have a great opportunity there. It's been raised a number of times of the different pedestrians. I was already thinking ahead of pedestrians on the getting off the bus on Father David Bauer Drive. The pavilion, if you go to the pavilion slide, does that show there in the little corner there that you know, this could be a facility that in the future could be expanded? It seems ripe for a nice footprint to have double its size in 15 years or so if we need it.
Yes.
Ah, okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, we'll end. Okay, that was it, Beth.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a comment on age-friendly, we are meeting with both the age-friendly committee, the Uptown Vision Committee, and looking to consult with the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee in the next few weeks as well on this, showing them the designs.
Wonderful. Thank you. Seeing no further questions. No, I don't see any further questions. Somebody like to move the recommendation as it stands? Councillor Durrell, Councillor Veith. All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Phil. And with that, we move on to the informal public meetings, of which we have 2 tonight. And the first one's University Ave. This is an informal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z-17-18 for 50 University Avenue East, Vive Developments Corporation. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future date. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk of the rear of the council chambers. Tonight there are 2 registration books, so please take care. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. This is an informal public meeting for 50 University Avenue East, zoning bylaw amendment Z 1718. The application has been submitted by Vive Development Corporation, represented here tonight by Pierre Chauvin of MHBC Planning. The subject site is located on the north side of University Avenue East, located between Weber Street North and Regina Street North. It is located approximately 300 meters from the Wilfrid Laurier University campus at the corner of King Street North and University Avenue West. This is a close-up of the subject site and surrounding properties. The subject site is surrounded by multi-residential buildings to the west, over here, to the north, and to the east, and by commercial plazas to the south. These are pictures of the subject site. An existing 6-story multi-residential building is located on the site, built in 1990. The building contains 52 units and 161 bedrooms. These are pictures of the properties that surround the subject site. The first picture shows the 3-story multi-residential buildings to the west of the site. The second picture shows the 7-story multi-residential building to the north of the site. The third picture shows the 5-story multi-residential building to the east of the site. And finally, the fourth picture shows the commercial plaza to the south of the site. In terms of the official plan, the subject site is designated mixed-use high-density residential, which permits apartment buildings with a minimum density of 150 beds per hectare and a maximum density of 750 beds per hectare. With respect to zoning bylaw 1108, the subject site is zoned BIWLU 25, which permits university and college-affiliated uses and permits university student residences. There's also a site-specific zoning bylaw that's applicable to this site, which restricts uses to university residential uses only. The site plan shows the existing layout of the site. The applicant has advanced a zoning bylaw amendment for this site to permit the reconfiguration of the existing 52-unit, 161-bedroom apartment building into a 108-unit, 108-bedroom apartment building. The applicant is not planning to add on any additions to the existing building. They're trying to reconfigure the existing building within the existing building envelope. The proposed reconfiguration would result in 56 additional units, but the overall occupant density of the building would be reduced by 53 bedrooms. Finally, the applicant intends to maintain the existing 53 parking spaces as they are right now on the site. Through their application, the applicant has requested to rezone the lands from BI WLU 25 to MR 25 with site-specific provisions to permit a reduced parking requirement of 0.49 spaces per unit, whereas the zoning bylaw requires 1 space per unit. These are the reports and plans submitted by the applicant in support of their application. All of this information is available on the city's website on our zone change applications webpage. City staff and regional staff are currently reviewing the submitted information. That concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Rita. First out of the gate is Councillor Whaley.
Well, thank you for your presentation. This is Council's first look at this project, but it's also the community's first look. And so one of the things that we'd like to do in an informal meeting is to look. And to read a council package and not have any idea of what the building is proposed to look like really puts everyone at a disadvantage. So I don't know why we don't do this every time, and how many times have I brought this up over the years, but it sure would be nice in the council package that when the council and the community have their first look at this change in the landscape, that they should have a visual representation as well, because that's part, the architecture is part of the whole deal, right? And how do we know? So this is not something that you need to respond to. It's just a comment that I'm not allowed to make, in fact, but I'll continue on this battle until we start to see some of these pictures showing up as part of the package.
Maybe the appropriate question, is there external construction anticipated in this? I read it as internal reconfiguration.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Whaley, the existing building is shown on the picture here. It is my understanding that the applicant is not changing the exterior of the building in any way. They're reconfiguring the units internally to add those additional units.
Further questions? Councillor Henry. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Reader. I mean, it seems to me that effectively what we're looking at is, a rezoning to take it out of the university only, since it will no longer be university only, and the only other issue at play is really the parking rate that we've got here. So I'm wondering about that in terms of how we're going to think about that. Obviously, we have an existing building with existing parking and existing requirements, and you've noted the double opposing direction in movement from how we calculate it. So I'm wondering how staff are proposing to sort of review and take a look at the parking question, given the units, given those changes, but also given the direction that the comprehensive zoning bylaw has been taking in terms of looking at parking on this site, which may be passed before we see a formal public meeting on this. So can you comment on how staff are looking at all of those, are going to look at all of those factors when assessing this application?
Certainly. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, so to Councillor Henry, the applicant has submitted a parking analysis report, so that's something that we would be looking at. We would be looking at the accessibility of the site. Is there transit readily available? Are there TDM measures that the applicant is proposing? Is the site, the location and context of the site, is there, amenities available nearby, commercial, commercial plazas nearby? Where would people shop? Where is the transit in relation to the site? All of those things would be looking at and we would be reviewing in our review of the application.
Any further questions? Councillor Duro looks like might have one.
Yeah, I guess part of it for me is University Avenue is obviously one of the streets that we're putting a lot of thought and effort into over the next 4 or 5 years. And what faces, so I think, I can kind of understand where Councillor Whaley's coming from in the sense that if there's an opportunity to make this building a little nicer, we would love to see that happen. So this portion that is facing university is such a that probably wouldn't get approved by today's standards, I'm assuming. So while that's not what we're talking about here today, I guess just for the applicant and for anyone that's listening out there, I think that there would be some interest in seeing some thought put to, if you are walking along University, which is a very well walked road, what are the eyes seeing, and can we do a little bit of a better job? Madam Clerk, I'm trying to be very good here, but that's just sort of, I think I'll just put it out there. Thanks.
Good point. Go ahead, Rita.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. If I may comment on that, as part of the application, this application essentially is a change in use that triggers the site plan process. So there's an existing site plan that has been approved on the site from 1990, but through the site plan process and part of the site plan addendum process, we would require the applicant to come through and submit a site plan addendum essentially, and we could look at the exterior of the building to see if there's any improvements that could be made through that process.
Great. Thank you. My question is on the zoning, MR25. Is that a common zoning along in adjacent buildings along there?
Yes, that's correct. I actually have a slide that shows the zoning around the site. It's all MR25, so it's multiple residence 25 stories being the max.
Oh, so all that's coded in yellow there. I wasn't sure about the neighboring properties there, but that's all MR25.
This is all MR25. This is the only site that has the BI WLU 25, and that is because Wilfrid Laurier used to own the site and zoned it for the university use.
Okay. Thank you. Last call for staff questions. Seeing none. Thank you very much, Rita. All right, one delegation is from MHBC, Pierre Chauvin. Welcome, Pierre.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. My name is Pierre Chauvin with MHBC Planning. With me this evening is Kate Wells of our office, as well as Stephen Litt, who's in the audience, who is with Vive Development Corporation. Just briefly, what I'll intend to. I don't intend to go over a lot of the same things that Rita had covered. I do have the similar slides, but I'll just quickly go over those. But really, I'll focus in on sort of the planning analysis and the parking justification and some of the analysis that we have come to our conclusions on. Just briefly, in terms of area, obviously we're dealing with a property about half a hectare, about roughly just over an acre property, existing 6-story apartment that provides existing student accommodation to Wilfrid Laurier. Wilfrid Laurier has declared this accommodation surplus. Our client has entered into an arrangement with him to continue to lease back that apartment building for the next 3 years. That 3 years is soon to be expiring, and our client's intent is to convert, and you've heard Ms. Seelock say that we're just going to be repurposing the interior layout of the floors to convert a lot of the 3 to 4 bedroom units into 1-bedroom apartment units, and going from 161 bedrooms to, or 108 bedrooms, or effectively 108 units. So the total occupancy load of this whole development will actually be reducing with this particular application. No modifications to the outside exterior have really been contemplated as part of this redevelopment, although I have heard your comments today, and we'll certainly be considering those with respect to the site plan development. Again, locationally, the site is well located with respect to the university. It's located on the north side of University Avenue between Weber and Regina. And in terms of particular land uses, we've color-coded some of the land uses. Some of the orange areas are higher density, multiple residential uses. The yellow areas on this plan are more industrial, light industrial uses. The purple areas are commercial uses. All within sort of that 500-meter walking radius, which we've identified, which is effectively a 5-minute walk, which you'll see at the corner of King and University Wilfrid Laurier campus is within that 500-meter or 5-minute walk. In fact, it's less than that. So very well located with respect to not only employment uses, similar type of higher density uses, but also transit and active transportation routes. There are actually 4 transit stops on University between Regina and Weber. In fact, 2 of those are I-Express routes, which provide rapid transit access to your LRT. This is the site. Again, it's the existing 6-story apartment building. And the existing parking configuration will not be changing. The building footprint is not changing with this application. It's really the internal layout of the units. And really the target market, again, will still be that affordable student housing, which is what is really driving the need here. So just summarizing what we are proposing. Existing, we have in the first column are 52 units with 161 bedrooms with the 53 parking spaces. Those parking spaces is not changing with this application. We are reducing the number of bedrooms in unit, but increasing the number of units. However, when you look at it in terms of sort of total occupancy, although we're increasing the number of units, the total number of people or occupants of in the apartment will be dropping by 53 people roughly. In terms of our analysis, we have provided a planning justification report, as Rita has indicated. We've reviewed the provincial growth plan, the provincial policy statement, your local, regional and local plans. And it is our opinion that this particular development conforms with provincial policy with respect to utilizing and maximizing existing infrastructure and an efficient use of land, and also is consistent with providing intensification within your built area. With respect to your official plan, or the regional official plan, lands are designated within the built boundary. They're located on transit, an existing transit corridor, also which is University Avenue, which is a regional road, and also a planned cycling routes. In terms of your own official plan, the lands are designated, as you've heard, mixed-use, high-density, and there are some site-specific provisions which recognize a student residence, but essentially a dual designation on these lands. The proposed amendment would be consistent, it would conform with the mixed-use density designation on these lands, and it also should be noted that these lands are within a major node, which encourages intensification and a mixing of a range and variety of uses. As Ms. Seelock indicated, these lands are zoned BI, or the university zone, which is essentially recognizing these three uses, the universities and affiliated colleges, student residences, and indoor-outdoor recreation facilities associated with the university or college. It's surrounded, as you can see, by other existing multiple residential 25 zones, as the mayor noted. And so what we are proposing is to rezone that land from the existing BI or university zone to a multiple residential 25 zone, which is similar to the surrounding land uses, to permit apartment dwelling units, and as well as you've heard, we are requesting a relief to the ratio, parking ratio from 1 space per unit to 0.49, and I'll explain a bit more about that soon. So essentially, this is what we are proposing in terms of the zoning category, the MR25, which the range of uses are listed on the sort of right-hand side within the MR25, which would allow for apartment dwellings. This is a slide which represents the city's proposed zoning for this site, which is an RMU-81 zone, which again would permit this type of development. So really, in terms of sort of future direction, this is where staff are going with respect to the zoning category with respect to these lands, and what we're proposing is certainly consistent with that. Again, so just to reiterate, we are requesting relief to the parking. We can't certainly meet the requirement for parking given the site is essentially fully built out. However, we have done an analysis of the parking and provided a parking justification as part of our submissions. Just by way of sort of context, we have identified the subject lands over in red on the far right side relative to the Laurier campus and the University of Waterloo campus, and we've drawn a 500-meter radius around both campuses, and as I said, this site is within walking distance, or well within walking distance, to Laurier campus, or about 250 meters. We've also identified the Northdale neighborhood, which, as you know, does provide for lower parking standards within that particular portion of the city, and we are certainly well within less than 250 meters of the Northdale community. And in fact, our site is actually much closer than other properties within the Northdale community to the Wilfrid Laurier. So in essence, if we were effectively less than 200 meters closer to the university or within this area, we wouldn't be here today in terms of a parking ratio. So So again, our findings, we've noted that the total occupancy is being reduced. We have done a parking survey based on information from our client, and we've discovered that less than the occupancy or utilization of the existing parking is about 60%, which is not surprising given that the bulk of the occupants are students. And the site is well located from contextually, as Ms. Seelock noted, it's well located in terms of transit, not only transit but also active transportation infrastructure, sidewalks, etc., and also a number of range of non-residential uses such as employment, the commercial uses and other employment uses. Is also within close proximity to a number of properties within the Northdale community. And we are also proposing a number of transportation or TDM measures as part of this proposal, and if implemented, would help support the parking reduction. And just to summarize some of those TDM measures, we're proposing to unbundle the parking so that tenants would have to pay for their parking. Also, there would be designated visitor parking, and that will be regulated on site. We are also proposing some car share spaces that will be available on site, as well as additional indoor bicycle storage to provide a safe place to provide bicycle storage. And then there is already a nice clear access, pedestrian access from University to the front entrance that will certainly be maintained and be promoted through this development. I should note also that most students have a transit pass as part of their registration to school, and certainly that is the market that we are targeting here, as well as other tenants for sure. This will be more geared on the affordable range, and so we're not going to deny the fact that that will be open to the market, but predominantly given its location, I think it's pretty safe to say that that will be the predominant market for this particular development. And so with all these combined factors, we believe that the existing parking spaces that are there is appropriate for the proposed use. We have done some other studies that were requested through our pre-consultation meeting with staff, a noise study which was prepared and submitted and is being reviewed by city and region. And essentially it's concluded that it complies with ministry guidelines in terms of stationary noise sources and transportation noise sources. We've also prepared a functional servicing report, which then also has concluded that the existing services that are there are adequate and available to provide, service these lands. In fact, as you've heard, the occupancy load is decreasing with this site, so if it works now, it will work in the future. So essentially, just to summarize, it is our opinion that this development is consistent with provincial policy. It does conform with your regional plan as well as your own official plan. It does promote the efficient use of water, existing services, and transportation network. It also promotes your intensification targets that not only the region but you've also established in your own official plan. And we believe the parking reduction is justified with the implementation of the TDM measures in combination with this context that we are in. And again, if we were located within the Northdale community, we would have required approximately, I think it's 23 spaces, if that's correct, 28 spaces if we were actually located when we actually have more than that. So again, if we were located 250 meters closer to University, this parking issue or debate would not be here. So those are my submissions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Pierre. First up is Councillor Henry.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Pierre, for your detailed and thorough presentation. You've spoken a couple of times to parking rates, and you showed briefly the overlay of the draft comprehensive zoning bylaw in terms of new designations. When I looked at your planning reports, including the parking study, you didn't just run the calculations on what would be required under MR 25, but you also ran what was required under the proposed zoning with the overlay. Can you comment on your view of the suitability of where we've been going so far in the draft comprehensive bylaw, on parking relative to your site. I'm looking at the opportunity before we finalize it to think about projects that come forward as perhaps test cases for whether or not we're getting it right or not in terms of some of those requirements, since we rarely get that kind of opportunity and people up here to talk to us about it. I thought I'd pick your brain.
Yeah. These are my thoughts, and I think what I would do is probably turn back to, if you'll bear with me, sort of this plan, sort of the context. And I think certainly, as we all know, we establish regulations sort of on a broad brush, and it doesn't always necessarily meet those site-specific contexts. And that's why we have situations like this for zoning bylaw amendments or variances or whatever. This is one of those cases where, in this particular area, we have a lot going for us in terms of mixed uses, proximity to transit, proximity to sort of major institutional uses that really warrants a deep look and consideration of reduced parking rates. It's certainly functioning now, and we believe it'll continue to function going forward. So, in terms of my view of where your staff are going with some of the parking regs, they may be somewhat high, and I'd certainly be encouraging of other municipalities, and I know other municipalities in this region are looking at reduced parking rates across the board, and I know the city has tried, but it's really, particularly in this situation, is not enough.
So I avoid verging on comments. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Next up is Councillor Whaley, please.
Well, thank you for your presentation. This interesting application that buildings of this vintage were usually made with high density of bedrooms and no amenities, and eventually got the title student warehouses because of it. And in your application, you want to kind of turn that around by reducing the number of density of bedrooms. But I wonder what you're doing on the amenity side, if you're planning to add any amenities for your residents going forward.
I'll have to bear with me. I'll have to turn to, I don't have the floor plans memorized, but I'll have to turn to Kate or Stephen if you can comment on that. I don't know if you heard, there is a common room in the basement, and there's also outdoor patios, amenity spaces, so those will certainly be maintained. But
with
again,
respect,
those matter. Some of the outdoor amenity spaces, as CLOC mentioned, that we may have to go through site plan, which was news to us today. But,
that brings us to our urban design guidelines and the opportunity perhaps to do something on the exterior with respect to amenity space. And I don't know if you're aware that we have a new urban design guidelines effective 2016, and it might be in your best interest to get a copy of that from Ms. Zelok to get an understanding about what 2017 building standards are, so that you might be able to consider how you can take this 1990 building and upgrade it with all the other upgrades that you're doing anyway.
Thank you. Further questions for the delegate? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Pierre.
thank you.
There was no one else registered. However, is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to Council at a later date. Thank you. Next up is our second informal public meeting. This is an informal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z1716 for 84 to 88 Columbia Street West. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by council during a formal public meeting at a future time. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. Application Z1716 concerns two properties on Columbia Street West, 84 and 88, owned by Nan Tang and C.U. Wang. And the application was submitted by Masri O Architects, and they are represented this evening by Rima Masri. To orient council to the location of the property, it is almost exactly halfway between Hazel Street and Albert Street on Columbia Street West on the north side of the street. On the south side of the street, of course, we have the northerly limits of the Northdale neighborhood, where we've seen a mix of developments over the years after council introduced MR zoning in 2005. And under construction in this air photo, but now almost completed, is the hub development with 5 buildings ranging from 6 to 14 stories in height. Further west along Columbia Street, we have a series of small 3- and 4-story apartment buildings. Similar on the south side of Columbia Street West, apartment buildings, and then as you get closer to Phillip Street, taller buildings and some commercial uses. In behind this property, and for several of the properties to the east and west along Columbia Street on the north side, are single detached dwellings. So the Cardale neighborhood to the north contains a significant number of single detached dwellings, some of which have been converted into duplexes, and some of which there are some apartment buildings on Cardale near Albert Street and at the north side of the street. In terms of the official plan, this area in and around this property is designated low-density residential. It does allow a range of built form from single detached all the way up to stacked townhouses, with a maximum density of 150 bedrooms per hectare and a maximum height of 10 meters. There are certain allowances for increased height for apartment buildings, although permitting apartment buildings requires satisfying certain criteria in our official plan. In terms of the zoning, the property is zoned single residence 2, if I can get my cursor, as are all the properties around it, either on Columbia Street or Cardale. As I noted, there are some multiple residence properties on the northerly side of Cardale, and then there are some apartment buildings on the opposite side of Albert Street and an apartment building on this location at Cardale and Albert. To the south is the Northdale with its own zoning, and then further to the northwest are employment uses. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment application, the applicant intends to rezone the lands from single residence 2, which really only permits a single detached dwelling, to medium density 2, with the intention of developing 28 terrace dwellings. We call them terrace dwellings in our current zoning bylaw. The common language would call them a stacked townhouse, and we are referring to them as stacked townhouses in the draft comprehensive bylaw. In addition to the new use, they've asked for a series of special provisions, reducing effectively the front yard setback from 6 to 5 meters, reducing the easterly side yard from 7.5 to 4 meters, reducing the parking from 1.4 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit, and then finally reducing the landscape open space requirement, which is a fairly onerous 175 square meters per unit, to 30% of the lot area. The 28 terrace dwellings will have a total of 36 bedrooms, so there'll be a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. This is the concept site plan submitted by the applicant with Columbia Street at the right-hand side of our image. Here we go. With an entrance off Columbia Street into a surface parking area. The dwellings are oriented largely to the parking area, and you can see there are a series of staircases which take you either up or down depending on whether you're going into a unit in the basement or going up to a unit either on the first or second floor. There are 2 parking spaces located under the building at the rear as well. A couple of building elevations. The one in the top left is the view of the building from the parking area. As you can see, If we look at my cursor going again, we have stairs going up. So typical with a stacked townhouse built form, you would have stairs going up. I enter into my unit, and then there'll be another door beside that staircase, which I would also enter, and then I'd go up an inside staircase to the upper floor units. And then similarly, there would be a downward staircase that would lead to the basement unit. The bottom right image is the building facade as it faces Columbia Street. So if we go back to the site plan, you can see that the building is oriented towards the parking area and has a small portion of it fronting onto Columbia Street. There's a path leading to a staircase in that site plan, and that image shows sort of the covered path entrance on the Columbia Street facade. In terms of submitted studies and report, the applicant provided a planning report, an urban design brief, a road traffic and stationary noise study, a transportation impact study, site servicing to ensure that the services were adequate, and then the concept site plan and elevations, which Council has just seen. Staff will be reviewing those reports and plans. We'll be looking at whether the requested change, effectively introducing a new use, the stacked townhomes, is appropriate. We'll be looking at the design, if that use is deemed appropriate, the design of the site, in terms of not only the layout of the site, but the building itself, the elevations, and then any other comments that arise during our review of the application from the public or agencies. Thank you, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you, Trevor. First up is Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. And Trevor, if you back up a few slides to the site plan, I think that's a good place to start. I think we just saw an application, and Councillor Whaley was raising it from 1990 that was, I think, oriented in this fashion, and there was some, notwithstanding the Columbia facade, which has apparently would have a door on it, and a lot of other building. Can you comment on the frequency with which we've seen recently stacked townhouse projects that are oriented in this manner versus ones that are oriented towards the street instead?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I'll collect my memory here. The one that stands out perhaps to Council as a very good example of a stacked townhouse development is at 133 Park Street at the corner of Park and Allen Street. If Council can recall that building, it actually faces Park Street, is oriented on the corner of Park and Allen. The parking lot, again, it does have a building facade that faces the parking street and entrances to the units that allow residents to park their car and walk into their units. But one of the great things that building did is it also addressed Park Street. So it had building entrances from Park Street, and it had a building entrance from Allen Street. So there are ways to orient stacked townhouse developments. There are a few of them also in Northdale, the Ivy projects that Council has seen on Albert Street. There are ways to orient stacked townhouse buildings. They actually lend themselves to pedestrian-oriented entrances. They don't require vehicular entrances immediately into a garage. There are lots of design options where you can have the building face the street, have the residents walk up almost like a brownstone in an older part of a city, right into their unit, and their parking would be in behind. So different ways, if we decide that the use is appropriate, the next evolution of our review would be looking at ways to better lay out the site. And I think the other thing a few things on my mind, I'll leave more of them for the applicant, but I did notice from the aerial on this one, there's a fair number of mature trees on the existing property. We can see them, I think, on the rear lot line. My sense is there's some stuff in the middle of the yard as well that seems to have shed leaves, because I can sort of see some wisps. And my Google photo looks a little bit different. But so can you comment on how those factor in as we're thinking about this application, and particularly because whatever happens both today and into the future on this property, those feel to me like a buffer that aids in the transition to low density residences inside the neighborhood. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, absolutely. I think, to reiterate, if the use itself is determined to be appropriate, or some level of intensification is appropriate on this property, then as part of our sort of design review of the site, the retention of mature vegetation naturally provides physical separation and perceived separation between whatever would go on this property and whatever is in behind it. So any measures to lay the site out such that that vegetation can be retained would be certainly a positive step.
And finally, on your review of sort of that first question, right, is an intensification appropriate on this site, particularly in this manner? I know it isn't an apartment building, but in terms of its height and massing, certainly as presented, it doesn't appear too different to me than an apartment building in terms of the effect or the visual effect it would have on folks behind it. So, I mean, are those tests that we have for whether that kind of intensification of apartment building useful or helpful in your review here? Are there things that we generally look for in considering that intensification question?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, there may be guideposts. They're not directly applicable, so we couldn't rely on them, those policies, to evaluate appropriateness of a terrace dwelling in this location. We can use them as a guidepost to determine whether that level of intensification or a lesser level of intensification is appropriate, as would opportunities to lay the site out to be more sensitive to what is in behind it, but also recognizing what might be or is across the street from it.
Thank you. Further questions from council? What are the lot dimensions there? Like, how deep are those lots? They're quite deep.
The lots are 61 meters deep. So they're a typical Northdale lot's about 40 meters, I believe. So it's significantly deeper than a Northdale lot.
And then, and this is really more a follow-on on Councillor Henry's line of questioning, but when you showed the map that shows this is one contiguous SR2 area, I believe. Yeah. So when this happens to a neighborhood, and I can't think of the last time it would have, but when this happens to a neighborhood where it's all, SR2, all contiguous, and the first one comes in, is there any special handling that we do as a city to say, it needs to be done in this certain way for the as the first one?
Well, absolutely. We always look at the context of the site. So if it was in the middle of Beechwood, it would be a different evaluation and a different conversation than this particular neighborhood. If we encounter a lot of interest from the community, there's opportunities to have meetings with those community members to determine what their concerns are, what their interests are, what they like and don't like about the project. So there's opportunities to have augmented consultation between the informal and formal.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Trevor. We have one registered delegation, and that's Rima Masri. Welcome, Rima. And your colleague, come on up, or whoever. Oh, first up, Sarah. I see. I was jumping ahead. You're next, Rima.
That's okay, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Sarah Code, and I am a planner with GSP Group. I am joined this evening by Myron Tang, the owner of the site, and Rima Masri as well. So I am here on behalf of the owner in support of zone change application for 84 and 88 Columbia Street West. So as you're aware, the site is comprised of two lots along Columbia Street West, and as we just spoke about, they are quite deep at 61 meters, and the lots are between Albert Street and Hazel Street. They comprise approximately 0.24 hectares, about half an acre. There are currently two single detached dwellings on the site, and the photos of those existing dwellings can be seen on this slide. Next two slides just provide some site context and neighborhood overview. As you can see, to the north, east, and west is primarily low-rise residential, and the site is located directly north of the Northdale neighborhood. On the south side of Columbia Street West are a number of mid-rise, medium-density residential apartment buildings. 8 stories is permitted on the south side of Columbia Street West. So the site is within close proximity to a number of employment opportunities, commercial and both the universities. The site is designated low-rise residential, which permits a variety of residential uses. 150 bedrooms per hectare is permitted and up to a maximum of 10 meters. Columbia Street West is identified in the OP as a main street, and so the OP looks to provide for complete streets that are identified as main streets and enhance the pedestrian experience. The site is currently zoned single residential, which primarily permits single residential uses and recognize the existing uses on the site. We are proposing to rezone the site to medium density 2 to permit stacked townhouses. And as was noted in the previous presentation, we are requesting 4 site-specific regulations, which include a front yard setback of 5 meters, whereas 6 meters is proposed, and a 4 meter easterly side yard setback of 4 meters, whereas 7.5 is proposed. We're proposing 1 parking space per unit, whereas 1.4 parking spaces are proposed, and 30% of the lot area be used for landscape open space. The requirement is for 175 meters squared per unit, which would equate to almost double the entire site area. So the reduced front yard setback is just to bring the building closer to Columbia Street West and to allow for a larger rear yard landscape buffer to the properties to the north. And the requested reduction in number of parking spaces just really recognizes the context of the site and the transportation options that are available in the area. This is the development concept, and the blue circles just note the requested front yard reduction and easterly side yard reduction. So 1 entrance off of Columbia Street is proposed, and with a total of 28 parking spaces, which matches the 28 units and 36 bedrooms. So we did submit 4 studies in support of the application. Existing water, sanitary, and storm in Columbia Street West will service the development and was determined to be adequate. A noise feasibility study was submitted and notes that any transportation and stationary noise can be mitigated. Traffic assessment was submitted and determined that approximately 14 to 17 new trips would be generated by the proposal, which is quite low, and there were no issues found. We submitted a planning justification report, and we concluded that the proposal is consistent with provincial policy statements, growth plan, regional and city official plans. So the proposed development, in our opinion, is in keeping with the density and height permissions of the official plan. So this proposed development would realize a density of 148.7 bedrooms per hectare, and the OP permits 150 bedrooms per hectare. We're proposing a building height of 9.9 meters, and the OP permits 10 meters. The width and depth of the site is appropriate for the density and height that is proposed. The site, as previously stated, is 61 meters deep, and a typical lot is 35 meters deep. So we're providing a sufficient rear yard to the properties to the north. And the floor space ratio that is proposed is quite low. It's about 18.5% building coverage on the site. And the proposed development will provide housing for residents that want to live in an urban area while still living in a low-rise residential form of development. Rima is now going to come up and speak to the design of the building.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I just want to touch on some of the architectural thinking and the background behind what we come up with and why. So this is a view from the street down on Columbia. So you can see that the building is looks like a 3-story building, so it's within the 10 meter for a low residential. And we heard that the official plan allows us to do this within certain conditions. And in fact, when we first came up with our first design, this used to be an apartment building, and then talking with planning staff, we realized that the fit within the low density, the low rise height was important, and so we came back with a terrace dwelling or a townhouse design approach, which respected the 10-meter typical height of a house, a 2-story house with a sloped roof, or a 3-story maybe with a loft. And then further in the design, we tried to fragment the building in smaller volumes so that it doesn't have a big presence from the neighborhood. Although across the street there are apartment buildings, so we're trying to mesh and create this transition in between. So this is the elevation that from the street, and we use some elements such as canopies and entrances, the building materials that are familiar with a house brick and siding and balconies, and we augmented that with some colors. This is the long of the site, looking from the parking. So we further fragmented the volume, and the background to this comes from what the owner is trying to do. These are, even though we have 28 units, each unit is fairly small. We're within 500 to 600 square feet, so each unit is essentially a bedroom and a bathroom. So the floor plan of a unit allows somebody to live individually as an academic, could be a student or a young professional. The intent is to provide a high level and highly customized living to students and visiting academics or young professionals, where their needs are better catered for, and that's what the owner's target market is, and that's where that size of the unit comes from. So although we're saying 28 units, but the units being so small, the building is not large. And by further dividing the building into these pods that create these courtyards, so it's a take on the typical townhouse that would be linear, where we pulled some of the volumes out and created these entrances. And these allow us not only entrances to the units, as Trevor explained clearly, but also gives us opportunities for some social interaction and some amenity spaces. So in terms of the variances that we're asking, mostly they're a factor of the zoning chosen for the site. So, but in terms of amenities, we do have amenities in addition to the landscape entrance area. We have some patios, some balconies, and some rooftop terraces as well. So overall, we'll have lots of amenities and in terms of in forms of landscape and outdoor areas for the residents. And in terms of one of the questions about the longevity of the building, it's typically townhouses, because they're low, they end up being long. Now, the orientation of the building comes from two reasons. It's the orientation of the site. It's a deep site, so it kind of lends itself this way. And it's also the orientation towards capturing the sun into the courtyards. That was also another factor. Of course, the parking always affects the design. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Rima. Questions from council? Councillor Henry.
Thank you very much. First for Sarah, since I'll go in your order. In terms of the intensification proposed at this particular location, your comment that I heard was the need for a greater diversity of housing stock in the neighborhood. Like you heard from a planner earlier, a number of projects just to the south of Columbia, which in the district plan is the same broad neighborhood. And my numbers back of the envelope that I ran yesterday is undeveloped parcels that are zoned for uses including stacked townhouses in Northdale that remain undeveloped but could be developed is about 26 acres. So I am wondering why here and why that's necessary in terms of contributing to, as you say, the diversity of housing types that are available in the neighborhood.
I guess within direct proximity to the site, there are not many stacked townhouse developments. It is primarily single detached and medium to higher density apartment buildings. So our thought is that directly along this corridor, this does provide additional housing choice.
I think, Rima, in terms of architecture, and I'll just say, Sarah, I imagine that's something that that staff would be commenting on in their own review as they report back to council. Certainly, I'd be interested in reading that. Rima, in your own design for this space, you heard some comments earlier around orientation towards the street versus longevity of the site. One project that Trevor didn't mention, but was actually one of the first zone changes that came forward in my ward in the previous term of council, and I think Trevor worked on that one as well, was just in from Herb Street on Churchill, where I think the same arguments were made initially around deep rather than wide, but you can see what was ultimately done there. So I'm wondering if you can comment at the moment on design choices that have been made and opportunities to think about some of the items that have been raised so far in terms of orientation to the street.
I liked Trevor's answer that the main issue is rezoning the property to allow us to achieve the goals we're after, whereas the design itself is malleable. There are more than one way to achieve that. Definitely, as an architect, I understand the importance of building facing the street and enhancing the street realm. I prefer having buildings over cars or parking facing the street. If this is the council's wish, we can go back and see if we can reorient the building. There is, why we approached it this way, it's a factor of the site configuration. The site is longer than it's wider, so that affected our thinking, but I didn't look at it the other way. I could. And if I may answer the earlier question about why here, the owner, Myron, didn't go looking for a site and then thought, oh, here's a good site, and let me approach this way. He happened to own these properties for a different use, and in time, as a business owner in Waterloo, his needs changed. So he was looking for uses for other uses for this property from what he was using it earlier. So that's when he approached me, and by looking into the zoning and the official plan, talking with city staff, we thought that this could be a reasonable approach to developing this property. He has a unique idea in terms of addressing a very narrow market need that he sees that exists through his other businesses in Waterloo. And I think that the design is unique in terms that you see recently a lot of smaller units with one bedroom or even studios in apartment buildings, but you don't see them as townhouses. So the uniqueness of this would be building oriented for single dwelling, but in a smaller scale that has the neighborhood feel. So giving you that balance between the privacy, but the community together.
I think that's certainly interesting in terms of where that goes, and I'll leave it there because interesting isn't overtly positive or negative, many things can be interesting, so therefore it's not a comment, since I can't make those at this point. But I raised earlier with Mr. Hawkins about, trees and buffers in the rear yard, and I wonder if there is some thought given to reconfigurations, how some amenity areas with significantly mature, trees that aren't harmed could support, community, cohesion and interaction better than, parking lots over top of where they used to be could. So I leave that as a sort of thought as you go do some further work before this comes to neighborhood meetings or formal public meetings.
Thank you.
Further questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, about to do that call. You're reading my mind right now. Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Come on up, state your name and place of residence, and you'll have 5 minutes. Come on right up to the podium. Yeah, to the podium. I just need your name, municipality, and you have 5 minutes to go.
My name is Abdul Qadir Al-Shugri. I'm the resident of 82 Columbia Street, the first neighbor on the east side of this project. And I have two concerns about this site plan proposed. First is the side setback, which is proposed 4 meters. I think then the distance would be between this building and my house like 5.5 meters or less, which is too small. The second concerns the amount of windows on the east elevation is, I believe, too much. And it's more even, and I think the code will allow for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Trevor will take down your comments, but can you confirm that you've signed the registry at the back?
Sorry?
There's the registry at the back to get further information. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else present here tonight who wishes to speak? Come on up, please state your name and municipality. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Joan Lawson, and my husband and I own a property that abuts this proposed development at 28 Cardell Crescent. I just have a few questions that I would like to have put on the table in consideration of this application. And I guess the most concerning for me is actually the elevation. Those properties on Columbia that are proposed for development have quite a slope in the elevation. And my concern, if there's going to be a large parking area, that the topic of stormwater management be very carefully addressed. If not, the homeowners that live behind that property are going to have flooded out backyards. Second would be, and I know Councilman Henry's already addressed this, the topic of the very mature trees that are on those properties that are being developed. And removal of those trees would have a fairly large detriment to the landscape in our community. And it's taken many years for those trees to grow. So I'd like to see a proposal for how that would be handled and those trees could be potentially maintained. Also, garbage. I have seen other properties that have been developed that have had garbage cans along the back of those properties, and that would be an issue for me. I'd like to see, as I have to have a garbage handling plan on my properties, I'd like to see how garbage would be handled and contained on this proposed development. And also, if there's going to be such a high density development in behind these single family homes on Cardell Crescent, and some of them are owner occupied by original owners, how will privacy then be maintained if there's such a high density development that's not only a lot of people, but it's going to be pretty high because Columbia is higher than Cardell Crescent. So those are the things I'd like to see considered as this proposal goes forward.
Thank you very much. And you've signed the registry at the back as well. And questions for the delegate? Seeing none, but I will have a question. Thank you. Trevor, when does information go up on our website that might have the pictures that we saw here tonight? When will the citizens be able to refer to that? For example, on the site plan, I think it had Mullocks for garbage collection on the back, I think I seem to recall, but when can people look at that?
It's available on our website today. It is already up.
Okay, thank you. And then just on stormwater management, that becomes part of, when do we deal with that for the
The applicants did submit a preliminary servicing report which looked at the capacity, but the detailed stormwater management is through site plan.
Okay, thank you. Further, I see somebody looking anxious. Come on up. State your name, municipality, and you'll have up to 5 minutes.
My name is Donald Fell, and you'll have to excuse my voice, I got a throat problem. And I live at 25 Cardell Crescent ever since it was first originated. And my basic problem with this situation is the whole concept of converting single residential over to any other density. And this will be the first stage. I've seen it happen all over the city. This will be the first stage of the change of single residential on Columbia on the north side in this section to a complete strip. And this will affect, of course, property values and all kinds of other things. The services will have to be expanded to accommodate the future of such an expansion. And so therefore the whole idea of proceeding with this first step to make a conversion is inappropriate. And now I don't know if you have before you, I have submitted to you an entire document, so I don't know if you want me to go through it or not. But
I think if you want, you can maybe just, you've covered some of the highlights. We have the official document, but if there's things you want to highlight right now, please feel free for next, still have 3 minutes left.
Well, on the individual property, of course, if it was proceeded with, it will, as previously stated, cause a lot of problems, and I won't go into all of those. The whole concept now that I see the plan is very similar to one that's on the north side of Cardell, which is another density area, and it is very high, it's very boxy looking. It comes out in front of the street line too far, and it will destroy the entire look of that side of the street. Now, it doesn't matter if there's stuff on the other side of the street or down in the next blocks. In that particular block, it will destroy the whole visual concept of that side. Now, parking, of course, is a problem everywhere, and there's parking on the streets all night, all over our area, and parking on lawns and things like that, which is against the bylaws, but it still happens. And they want less parking, so if that's proceeded with, that will cause a problem, particularly on Columbia Street. The traffic on Columbia, as you know, is very high, and this would interfere with that. Now, I might say that I'm an original there, as I said before, and it was my intention, and I know it was the intention of others that lived there originally and still live there, that they intended to stay there for the rest of their years. And it has become more difficult because of the conversion of many units on Cardell into multiple student residences, and that's a big problem in itself. Now, this particular location will increase that density, as mentioned before. It's adjacent to us, and there are all kinds of groupings. Since St. Patrick's Day across the road from me, there was every single Wednesday night there was a party of over 200 students, and it was definite. It happened every Wednesday, and it was as noisy as all get out. and they came in taxis and cars, and the traffic was horrendous, the noise was horrendous. The mess on my property and all the adjacent properties from all of these students in particular, beer bottles and all kinds of containers and messes and everything else that goes on, is not something that we should have to put up with, and this will just further intensify the area, because where will these people go, if they're students in particular? They will try and come down to whatever place will have these parties, and as I say, they've had them on Cardill. So it'll just increase the population of that type of area, of person, and cause more noise and problems. Now, another thing of significant importance is the value of properties. Now, some of them, because of this, if it will be continued down the street, people will pay more then to get the property to build this kind of a unit. On the other hand, though, if you're adjacent to it, your property value will go down. And if we have more density there, our property values are just going to go down. And I'm at the point where sooner or later I'm going to pass on, and the property value for my rest of my family will be reduced. Now,
And you're down to your last 10 seconds, so I might need to ask you to wrap up.
Okay. Well, as I say, the main thing is this should not happen whatsoever. The area is single residence. It should remain single residence. And just because someone made a mistake when they bought the property, which it sounds like they did, and they will now want to build on it and increase their profit, that's a wonderful thing for them. But it is not the thing that should be happening in the city of Waterloo in this particular location. If they made a mistake, they'll have to sell the property back at whatever good value they paid for it in the first place. They don't have to have the permission to build a unit like this in order to make money. And that's what it's all about, just making money. And it just should not happen. Thank you.
Thank you for your submitted comments, as well as showing up tonight and speaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last call for speakers. Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to Council at a later date. Thank you all. As we continue on, there's no notice of motions. We have regional information there to read, unfinished business. Any new business from council members? Anything to mention? Seeing none. Seeing none? Okay, enactment of bylaws. Somebody want to enact some bylaws? Councillor Henry does. Councillor Veith does. All those in favor? That's all of us. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Henry, Councillor Veith. All those in favor? We're all good on that. Thank you.